The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The guy standing over Maya's table wasn't used to being talked back to, especially not by someone who looked so unassuming. Most people either cowered or laughed nervously when he came at them with that cocky attitude of his. But Maya, she didn't flinch. Instead, she sat there cool as a cucumber, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. It threw him off balance, but only for a second. He leaned closer, trying to regain control of the situation. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice low and laced with warning. He reached out suddenly, snatching her notebook from the table before she could react. Holding it up high, he smirked down at her. "Maybe if you apologize, I'll give this back." Maya blinked slowly, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she let out a soft laugh, not mocking, but more like she found the whole thing ridiculous. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. "That's literally the oldest trick in the book. Did you rehearse that in front of the mirror or something?" Her words stung more than any insult could have. For a moment, the guy just stood there, frozen, his face turning red. Whether it was embarrassment or anger, or maybe both, was hard to tell. But one thing was clear. He wasn't used to being called out like this. People usually backed down, apologized profusely, or tried to change the subject. Not Maya. She wasn't afraid to call things exactly how she saw them. "Finally," he snapped. With a growl, he tossed the notebook onto the floor, sending papers scattering everywhere. Then he took another step closer, towering over her like he thought sheer size would intimidate her into submission. "You've got 5 minutes, he spat, his voice rising slightly. 5 minutes to show some respect before I make you regret ever opening your mouth." The library, which had been buzzing quietly with activity just moments ago, now felt eerily silent. Even the sound of pages flipping seemed to fade away as everyone waited to see what would happen next. A few students nearby exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Some pretended to focus on their books while others watched openly, too curious to look away. But Maya, she didn't seem fazed at all. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up, straightening to her full height. She wasn't particularly tall. In fact, the guy still had several inches on her. But there was something about the way she carried herself that made her seem larger than life. She squared her shoulders, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in her gaze, only calm determination. 5 minutes, huh?" she said, her tone casual, almost playful. "All right, let's see what happens." It was such an unexpected response that the guy faltered again. He'd expected shouting, tears, maybe even pleading, but not this. Not someone who refused to play by his rules. For a split second, doubt flickered across his face, but then he quickly masked it with another sneer. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he muttered, taking a step back as if to give himself space to think. Maya bent down to pick up her scattered notes, carefully stacking them back together without breaking eye contact. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, as if she wanted to make it crystal clear that she wasn't rattled. When she finally straightened up, she tucked the notebook under her arm and tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was some kind of puzzle she was trying to solve. "You know," she said, her voice steady and calm. "You keep talking about respect, but here's the thing. You don't get respect by demanding it. You earn it. And frankly, throwing tantrums in the middle of the library isn't earning you anything." Her words hit home harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came out. For once, he didn't have a quick comeback. All those years of bullying, of pushing people around and getting away with it, had taught him that. Most people would fold under pressure. But Maya wasn't most people. She had this quiet strength about her, the kind that couldn't be shaken by loud voices or aggressive posturing. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Around them, the library began to return to its usual rhythm, students whispering to each other, chairs scraping against the floor, the occasional cough breaking the quiet. But the tension between Maya and the guy remained palpable, hanging in the air like storm clouds refusing to disperse. Then, just as the guy was gearing up to say something else, Something meaner, louder. A new voice interrupted the standoff. Is there a problem here? Both of them turned toward the source of the interruption. Standing a few feet away was the school librarian, a petite woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. She held a stack of books in her arms, but her attention was fully on the scene unfolding in front of her. Her expression was calm, but there was steel behind her eyes, the kind of authority that commanded respect without needing to shout. The guy immediately straightened up, trying to look innocent. "No, ma'am," he said quickly, his tone shifting from aggressive to overly polite. "Just having a conversation." The librarian raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. It didn't sound like a conversation. It sounded like harassment. She turned her attention to Maya, her voice softening just a little. "Are you okay, dear?" Maya nodded, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "I'm fine. Thanks." The librarian set the books down on a nearby table and stepped closer, her presence filling the space between them. "If you can't behave appropriately in my library, young man," she said, her tone firm but measured, "then perhaps you should leave. This is a place for learning, not intimidation." The guy hesitated, his jaw tightening as he realized he'd been caught. He glanced at Maya one last time, his glare filled with frustration and maybe even a touch of fear, before muttering something under his breath and storming off. His friends, who had been lingering near the entrance, followed after him, casting nervous looks over their shoulders as they went. As soon as they were gone, the librarian placed a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "Let me know if he gives you any more trouble," she said gently. "You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of behavior." Maya gave her a small smile. "Thanks. I appreciate it." With that, the librarian returned to her desk, leaving Maya alone once again. She sat back down at her table, gathering her scattered notes and smoothing out the crumpled pages. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the whispers spreading through the library. Students were talking about what had just happened, their voices hushed but excited. Some shot her admiring glances while others looked concerned, wondering if the guy would come back for revenge. Maya ignored them all, focusing instead on finishing her project. She knew better than to let one confrontation derail her entire afternoon. Still, as she wrote, part of her mind lingered on what had just transpired. She hadn't gone looking for trouble, but trouble had found her anyway, and she'd handled it the best way she knew how. The school library was usually a quiet place, the kind of spot where you could hear the soft rustle of pages turning, or the faint tapping of someone's pencil as they worked on their homework. It wasn't just a room filled with books. It was a sanctuary for kids who wanted to escape the noise and chaos of the hallways. On this particular afternoon, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden beams across the rows of shelves. The air smelled faintly of paper and old wood, a comforting scent that made everything feel calm. At one of the corner tables sat a girl everyone knew, but didn't really know. She was good at blending in when she wanted to, keeping her head down, and focusing on her work. Her name wasn't important right now. What mattered was how she carried herself. There was something about her posture, the way she leaned over her notebook with a pen in hand, scribbling furiously while music played, softly through her earbuds. She had a quiet confidence, like she didn't need anyone else's approval to feel okay about herself. People noticed it even if they didn't say anything out loud. This girl, let's call her Maya for now, had been coming to the library almost every day after school for as long as anyone could remember. Sometimes she'd sit alone, other times with a friend or two, but today she was by herself. She was working on a history project, jotting down notes about some long-ago war that probably seemed ancient to most teenagers. To her, though, it felt interesting. The stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things always did. Maya didn't look up when the door creaked open. She barely registered the sound of footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. What caught her attention instead was the sudden shift in energy. The peaceful vibe of the library changed almost instantly, like a storm cloud rolling into an otherwise clear sky. She glanced toward the entrance and saw him walking in, flanked by two of his buddies. He moved with this swagger, like he owned the place, scanning the room like he was looking for trouble, or maybe just someone to pick on. This guy was no stranger to anyone at school. Everyone knew who he was, even if they tried hard not to cross paths with him. He was the kind of person who thrived on making others uncomfortable, feeding off their fear and insecurity. His reputation preceded him. Loud, obnoxious, and always ready to stir up drama. If there was ever a list of people you'd want to avoid in the hallway, his name would be at the top. His eyes landed on Maya almost immediately. A smirk spread across his face, slow and deliberate, like he'd already decided what he was going to do next. He motioned for his friends to hang back near the entrance, giving them a subtle nod before heading straight for her table. Every step he took seemed louder than the last, his heavy boots thudding against the floor like a drumbeat announcing his arrival. Maya sighed inwardly, recognizing the signs. She'd seen this act before. It wasn't the first time someone had singled her out, though it was rare for anyone to approach her directly. Most people left her alone because she had a way of handling herself that made it clear she wasn't someone to mess with. But this guy, he either didn't care or hadn't gotten the memo yet. He stopped right beside her table, standing close enough to block her light. Maya finally looked up, pulling one earbud out so she could hear whatever nonsense he was about to spew. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension crackling between them. The guy grinned, clearly enjoying himself. "Hey, new girl," he said mockingly, even though Maya had gone to the same school for 3 years. "I've got something to say to you." Maya raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Do I look like I'm interested?" That wiped the grin off his face for a second, but he recovered quickly. Leaning down, he planted both hands on the table, leaning in too close for comfort. "You think you're better than everyone else? Walking around here all high and mighty?" She stared at him, unfazed. "Do I look like I'm trying to be better than anyone? Or are you just mad because no one laughs at your jokes anymore?" Her response hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then, his expression hardened, and he slammed his hand on the table, sending her notebook sliding forward. "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "Nobody talks to me like that." A few students nearby glanced over nervously, unsure whether to step in or pretend they hadn't seen anything. Maya stayed calm, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "Oh, really? What are you going to do about it?" And just like that, the stage was set. Whatever happened next would change more than just their afternoon. It would ripple through the entire school, leaving its mark on everyone involved. By the time the final bell rang, word of what had happened in the library had already spread like wildfire through the school. Gossip traveled fast in hallways and locker rooms, especially when it involved someone standing up to the guy who thought he ruled the place. As Maya packed up her things and headed toward the bus stop, she could feel the weight of curious eyes following her every move. Some students whispered behind cupped hands, while others gave her quick nods of approval as she passed by. At first, Maya tried to ignore it all. She wasn't looking for attention or applause, she'd simply done what felt right in the moment. But as the day wore on, it became clear that the incident wasn't going to fade into the background anytime soon. By lunchtime, a small group of kids had gathered around her table, eager to hear her side of the story. "Did you really tell him off like that?" one boy asked, his eyes wide with admiration. "I heard you didn't even flinch." Maya shrugged, picking at her sandwich. "I just said what was on my mind. He's not as scary as he thinks he is." Another girl chimed in, leaning forward excitedly. "That's so cool. No one talks to him like that. Honestly, I think everyone's kind of in awe of you right now." Maya smiled faintly but shook her head. "It's not about being cool. It's about standing your ground. If we let people push us around, they'll keep doing it." Her response earned murmurs of agreement from the group, though not everyone seemed convinced. One kid, sitting slightly apart from the rest, spoke up hesitantly. "Yeah, but don't you think he's going to come after you? I mean, he doesn't take stuff like this lightly." Maya paused, considering the question. She knew there was truth in what the kid said. The guy thrived on power trips and losing face in front of an audience, especially someone like her, wasn't something he'd easily forget. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. "If he does," she said finally, meeting the kid's gaze, "then I'll handle it. Running away won't solve anything." The conversation continued for a while longer, with more questions and theories flying back and forth. Eventually, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and the group dispersed. Maya stayed behind for a few extra minutes, finishing her food in silence. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing beneath the surface. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that evening, Maya sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through social media to unwind after a long day. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, most of them harmless updates from friends or random posts from people she barely knew. But then, something caught her eye. A video thumbnail featuring none other than the guy from the library. Curiosity got the better of her, and she clicked play. The clip was short, maybe 30 seconds long, but it hit hard. Someone, probably one of his friends, had filmed their confrontation earlier that day. The footage showed him towering over her, his expression fierce, while her calm demeanor stood out starkly in contrast. The caption underneath read, "This is why we need stricter rules at our school. Respect authority." Maya stared at the screen, her stomach twisting with frustration. The video was edited cleverly, cutting out key moments where he had been aggressive or unreasonable. Without context, it looked like she was the one starting trouble, refusing to listen or apologize. Comments flooded in below the post, many siding with him. Some accused her of being rude or confrontational, while others praised him for standing up to her. For a moment, anger bubbled inside her chest. How dare he twist the truth like that? What gave him the right to paint himself as the victim when he was the one bullying her in the first place? But instead of firing off an angry reply or posting a heated defense, Maya took a deep breath and closed the app. Reacting impulsively wouldn't help. It would only fuel the drama further. She needed to think carefully about her next move. The next morning, Maya arrived at school armed with a plan. She hadn't slept much the night before, spending hours gathering evidence that told the full story. Screenshots of past incidents involving the guy filled her phone's gallery. Posts where he insulted classmates online, messages where he threatened others, even videos of him bragging about pranks that bordered on vandalism. Each piece of proof painted a clearer picture of who he really was beyond the bravado and fake charm. Her first stop was the library. Mrs. Patel, the librarian, greeted her warmly as she walked in. "Good morning," she said, noticing the determined look on Maya's face. "Is everything all right?" Maya nodded, pulling out her phone. "Can I show you something and maybe ask for your help?" Mrs. Patel gestured for her to sit down, listening intently as Maya explained everything. The confrontation, the video, the comments blaming her for the argument. When she finished, the librarian's expression turned serious. "That's unacceptable," she said firmly. "No student should have to deal with harassment like this. What do you need me to do?" With Mrs. Patel's blessing, Maya headed straight to the principal's office during first period. Her heart raced as she knocked on the door, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. When the principal invited her in, she stepped inside, her confidence wavering just slightly. This was it, the moment where she either made things right or risked making them worse. "Sir," she began, taking a seat across from him, "there's something I need to talk to you about, something that's been happening for a while now." She laid out the evidence she'd collected, explaining each screenshot and recording in detail. The principal listened silently, his brow furrowing deeper with each revelation. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," he said. "We'll look into it immediately." Relieved but still cautious, Maya thanked him and returned to class. Word of her visit spread quickly among teachers and staff, and by lunchtime, rumors were swirling about potential consequences for the guy. Students whispered excitedly in the cafeteria, speculating about what might happen next. For once, the focus wasn't entirely on Maya. It was on holding someone accountable for their actions. Meanwhile, the guy seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He strutted through the halls as usual, laughing loudly with his friends, and acting like nothing was wrong. Every now and then he'd glance at Maya, smirking as if to remind her that he still held some kind of power over her. But Maya didn't react. She kept her head high, knowing that justice was already in motion. During lunch, she created an Instagram story of her own. In it, she shared screenshots of his bullying behavior alongside a message written in bold letters. Bullying thrives when good people stay silent. Speak up, stand together. She ended the post with a simple yet powerful reminder. The truth always comes out. Within minutes, her story blew up. Dozens of students responded, sharing their own experiences of being targeted by the guy. Some admitted they'd been too scared to speak up before, while others expressed gratitude for Maya's courage. Even a few of his former friends came forward, confessing that they were tired of enabling his toxic behavior. The tide was turning, and fast. By the end of the day, the administration had launched a formal investigation. Teachers questioned witnesses, reviewed security footage, and examined the evidence Maya had provided. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. That evening, the guy was suspended pending further disciplinary action. As the news sank in, the atmosphere at school shifted noticeably. Kids who had once tiptoed around him now walked with newfound confidence, no longer afraid of retaliation. For the first time in years, the hallways felt lighter, freer. And Maya? She didn't seek recognition or praise. She was just glad to see her peers stepping out of the shadows, ready to reclaim their space. As the weeks rolled by, the school began to feel like a completely different place. The once heavy atmosphere had lifted, replaced by an energy that buzzed with hope and possibility. Kids who used to tiptoe through the hallways now walked with purpose, their shoulders squared and heads held high. Conversations in classrooms were livelier, filled with laughter and genuine curiosity instead of whispers about who might get targeted next. Even the cafeteria, which had often felt divided into invisible cliques, seemed more welcoming. Tables that had been reserved for certain groups were now open to anyone, creating unlikely friendships and shared stories. For Maya, though, this newfound sense of unity came with its own challenges. She hadn't asked for any of this attention, she'd simply wanted to stand her ground and protect herself. But she quickly realized that her actions had sparked something bigger than she could have imagined. People looked at her differently, now not just as a quiet girl who kept to herself, but as someone who had dared to challenge the status quo. Some treated her with admiration, others with cautious respect, and a few even approached her for advice on how to handle their own struggles. One afternoon, during study hall, a boy from her math class slid into the seat next to hers. He was one of those kids who always seemed to blend into the background, avoiding eye contact and rarely speaking unless spoken to. Today, however, he looked determined, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I ask you something?" Maya glanced up from her textbook, surprised. "Of course, what's up?" The boy hesitated, fidgeting with the edges of the paper. Finally, he blurted out, "I don't know how to deal with it anymore. Everyone thinks I'm weak because I won't fight back when people mess with me. But fighting it's not who I am." Maya nodded slowly, understanding exactly what he meant. "You're not weak because you choose peace over conflict. That takes strength too." He looked relieved, as if hearing those words had taken a weight off his chest. "But how do you do it? How do you stand up without losing yourself in the process?" She thought about his question for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "It's not about being louder or angrier than the other person. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. Sometimes, standing up means walking away. Other times it means speaking your truth no matter how hard it is. There's no right way to do it, it's about finding what works for you." The boy smiled faintly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thanks, I needed to hear that." Word of Maya's influence spread beyond the student body, reaching teachers and parents alike. During a faculty meeting, Mrs. Patel, the librarian who had witnessed the initial confrontation, shared Maya's story with the staff. This young woman stood up for herself in a way that inspired everyone around her, she said, her voice filled with pride. She didn't just stop one bully, she started a movement. We owe it to our students to create a safer environment where they feel empowered to speak up. Her comments sparked a lively discussion among the teachers. They agreed that while discipline was important, fostering a culture of kindness and accountability was equally crucial. By the end of the meeting, they had drafted plans for workshops and assemblies focused on empathy, conflict resolution, and peer support. The goal was simple: to ensure that every student knew they had allies in their corner. When Maya heard about these initiatives, she couldn't help but smile. She wasn't involved in planning them. They were entirely the teacher's idea, but knowing that her actions had inspired such positive change made her feel proud. Still, she reminded herself not to get carried away. This wasn't about her. It was about creating a better future for everyone. Despite the progress, Maya knew there would always be obstacles. Change didn't happen overnight, and old habits died hard. Some students still clung to the fear and mistrust that had defined the school for so long, hesitant to believe that things could truly improve. Others resented Maya, accusing her of causing unnecessary drama or rocking the boat. A group of seniors even tried to start rumors about her, claiming she was seeking attention or trying to make herself look better than everyone else. At first, the negativity stung. Maya had expected some pushback, but hearing whispers behind her back was harder than she'd anticipated. One day, after overhearing a particularly nasty comment, she found herself questioning whether all of this was worth it. Was she really making a difference, or was she just stirring up trouble? That evening, she sat alone in her room, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events in her mind. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications, but she ignored them, unsure if she wanted to face whatever awaited her online. Eventually, curiosity got the better of her and she opened Instagram. To her surprise, her feed was flooded with messages of encouragement, not just from classmates, but from students at other schools who had seen her posts and been inspired by her courage. One message stood out in particular. It was from a girl she'd never met who wrote, "Thank you for showing me that it's okay to stand up for myself. I've been bullied for years and I always thought it was my fault. But reading your story made me realize I deserve better. You changed my life." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she read the words over and over again. For the first time, she truly understood the ripple effect of her actions. Yes, there would always be naysayers and critics, but their voices didn't matter. Not when she knew she was helping even one person feel stronger or braver. The following week, Maya decided to take her activism a step further. Inspired by the workshops the teachers were organizing, she proposed starting a peer mentorship program where older students could guide younger ones through challenges like bullying, academic stress, or social anxiety. The idea quickly gained traction, with both students and faculty eager to participate. Within days, dozens of volunteers signed up, ready to lend a listening ear or offer advice based on their own experiences. During the program's kickoff event, Maya stood at the front of the auditorium, addressing a crowd of curious faces. Her heart raced as she gripped the microphone, aware of how many eyes were on her, but as she began to speak, her nerves melted away. "I know what it's like to feel powerless," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I know what it's like to wonder if anyone will listen when you try to speak up. But here's the thing, your voice matters. Every single one of you has the power to make a difference, whether it's by standing up for yourself or supporting someone else. Together we can build a community where everyone feels safe, valued, and heard." The room erupted in applause, students cheering and whistling as Maya stepped back from the podium. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to bask in the warmth of their appreciation. Then she turned to the side, letting another student take the stage to share their story. As she watched the presentations unfold, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about all of them. Each person in that room carried their own struggles, their own fears, and their own dreams. And if she could help even one of them find their footing, then everything she'd been through would be worth it. The library was dead silent save for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional shuffle of papers. Everyone's eyes were glued to Tiffany, who stood frozen, clutching the document in her hand like it might bite her. Her face had gone pale, and her usual confidence had evaporated into thin air. Whatever Jayla had handed over had clearly shaken her to her core. Jayla didn't say a word. She just sat there, perfectly calm, watching Tiffany process what she'd just read. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Even Tiffany's friends seemed unsure of what to do. One of them whispered, "What is it?" But Tiffany didn't respond. She just stared at the paper, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tiffany managed to choke out, Where did you get this?" Jayla leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms casually. Her expression was unreadable, part amusement, part seriousness. "Oh, it wasn't hard to find," she said lightly, as if discussing the weather. "Turns out, when you dig a little deeper, some secrets aren't so secret after all." Tiffany's hands tightened around the paper, crumpling it slightly. You had no right," she stammered, her voice rising. "This isn't yours to share." "Actually," Jayla interrupted, her tone firm now, "it is mine to share, or rather it's my mom's. She's the one who made the donation, after all." That comment sent ripples through the small crowd gathered nearby. A few students exchanged confused looks, while others leaned closer, eager to piece together what was happening. Tiffany's friends looked at each other nervously, clearly sensing that something big was about to unfold. "Donation?" one of them whispered, barely audible. "What's she talking about?" Jayla glanced at them briefly before turning her attention back to Tiffany. "Let me explain it for everyone," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You see, Lincoln, high costs a lot of money to attend. Not everyone can afford it, right? Some families need help paying tuition, and guess who helps fund those scholarships?" She paused for dramatic effect, letting the question hang in the air. Tiffany's face turned even redder, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Jayla continued before she could interrupt. "My mom does," Jayla said simply. "She donates thousands of dollars every year to make sure kids from all kinds of backgrounds can come here, including—" She let the word linger before finishing with a pointed look at Tiffany. "Corn to you." Gasps rippled through the library. If the room had been quiet before, it was downright silent now. Even the librarian, who had been shelving books in the far corner, stopped mid-motion to stare. No one could believe what they were hearing. Tiffany's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. You can't prove that," she muttered weakly, though her voice lacked conviction. Deep down, she knew Jayla was telling the truth. "Oh, I can," Jayla replied, her tone softening ever so slightly. "And trust me, if I wanted to, I could tell the whole school exactly how much your family depends on that scholarship, how much you depend on it. But I haven't, have I?" Tiffany swallowed hard, her throat dry. For once, she didn't have a snarky comeback or a cutting remark. All she could do was stand there looking smaller and more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen her. "But here's the thing," Jayla added, leaning forward slightly. "I don't want to embarrass you. Honestly, I don't care enough about you to bother. What I do care about is making sure people like you stop using fear and intimidation to control others. It ends now." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Tiffany blinked rapidly, tears welling up in her eyes despite her best efforts to hold them back. She hated crying in front of people. It made her feel weak, but she couldn't stop herself this time. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked so hard to maintain, was crumbling right in front of her. "You think you're untouchable?" Jayla went on, her voice gentle but firm. "You strut around this school like you own the place, acting like you're better than everyone else, but the truth is you're just scared. Scared of being ordinary. Scared of not being liked. So you pick on people to make yourself feel bigger, stronger, smarter. But guess what? It doesn't work. All it does is hurt people, and eventually, it comes back to bite you." By now, Tiffany's friends had taken a step back, distancing themselves from her. They weren't laughing anymore. If anything, they looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly as they realized the full weight of what Jayla was saying. One of them mumbled something under their breath and quickly walked away, followed by another. Within moments, Tiffany was standing alone, exposed and humiliated. "I'm only going to say this once," Jayla concluded, standing up and gathering her things. "If you ever bother me or anyone else at this school again, I won't hesitate to share this little fact with the entire student body. Got it?" Tiffany nodded mutely, too stunned to argue. Without another word, Jayla slung her backpack over her shoulder and walked toward the exit, leaving Tiffany standing there like a statue. As she passed by the other students, she gave them a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay," she said softly. "We've all got our battles. Just remember, kindness costs nothing." With that, she disappeared through the library doors, leaving behind a scene of shock and disbelief. Tiffany remained rooted to the spot, still clutching the crumpled paper in her hand. For the first time in years, she felt truly powerless, and it terrified her. Word spread fast. By the end of the day, nearly every student at Lincoln High knew about the showdown in the library. Rumors flew like wildfire, fueled by snippets of overheard conversations and exaggerated retellings. Some versions claimed Jayla had blackmailed Tiffany. Others swore she'd called the principal and gotten Tiffany expelled on the spot. None of them were entirely accurate, but the underlying message was clear. Tiffany Harper's reign of terror was over. For Jayla, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a public confrontation. She didn't seek recognition or praise for what she'd done. In fact, she avoided talking about it altogether, focusing instead on her studies and her beloved books. But whether she liked it or not, she had become a symbol of resistance against bullying at Lincoln High. Students who had once feared speaking up began finding their voices, emboldened by Jayla's example. As for Tiffany, the fallout was swift and brutal. Her friends abandoned her, unwilling to associate with someone whose reputation was now tarnished beyond repair. Teachers, who had long suspected her behavior but lacked evidence, started keeping a closer eye on her. And worst of all, she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was whispering about her behind her back. Within weeks, Tiffany transferred to another school, citing personal reasons. Few people were sad to see her go. Those who were left behind breathed a collective sigh of relief, grateful for the newfound sense of peace in the hallways. But the real change came later, as students began reflecting on what had happened. Jayla's actions hadn't just taken down a bully. They had sparked a conversation about kindness, empathy, and standing up for what's right. Slowly but surely, Lincoln High started to transform into a place where everyone felt welcome, valued, and safe. And Jayla? She kept doing what she always did, reading, learning, and quietly leading by example. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show the world that being kind doesn't mean being weak. It means being strong enough to rise above.